Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our Evolve by LinkedIn session today. It's a new virtual event series that we are hosting that's designed to enable you and your team to transform your business, your brand, and yourselves as marketers. My name is Ann Lundberg, and I am a Director of Sales in LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. And I am so excited to share this wonderful session with you today and to introduce you to one of my favorite people in my career, Doug Weaver. Before we get started, I want to do a bit of housekeeping so that all of you can get the most out of our experience today. We're going to be sending out the full recording with additional resources after the event, so don't worry about taking notes. And we're going to be taking questions from all of you throughout the session today. When you have questions, please type them into the Q&A tool to the right of your screens. Also, please do take the time at the end of this webinar to fill out the survey. Your feedback is so valuable to us, and we want to ensure that your webinar experience continues to get better. If at any point you experience technical difficulties, please hit the refresh button, and we hope that will solve any issues. Don't worry, we'll still be here when you get back. So now I have the pleasure of introducing Doug Weaver. Doug, are you there with me? Hi, Doug.
I am. Hi, Ann.
So I'm going to say a few things. I hope I don't make you blush, but it's not the first time I've said them, so I know you're prepared. I want to say for all of you that I've been doing this for a long time. Doug has been doing it longer. And in my time in sales, I have trained with Doug when we started to learn about internet in the first place and how to sell this new medium. I hired him over many years and many opportunities to train my teams. I have been honored to be part of his board of advisors for his business and some aspects of his business over time. And I have subscribed to his newsletter, getthedrift.com, and I probably have read almost every issue. So I will say about Doug that he is, from my point of view, the most effective communicator of the fundamental ideas of solution selling I've ever met. I'm not alone. 650 companies have worked with Doug over the years. Of course, LinkedIn, as we work with him now, but also BuzzFeed and Snapchat, the New York Times, Twitter, Samsung, and so many more. So what are we going to do here today with you and with Doug? Like many of you, Doug runs a business. In his case, it's a small business. And he had to really completely rethink and reimagine what this business is going to be in a COVID virtual world, because his business was 100% in person, training and educating sales. So he's going to address some of the biggest challenges that I think all of us are facing now about how to have a successful customer presence in a Zoom world. And he's going to ask us to consider a fundamentally important question. Really, is it different at all? And if so, what about those fundamentals? Because I think a lot of them are still the same. So Doug, that's my handoff for you. I'm going to disappear for a while, and then I'll come back every once in a while when we get questions from our listeners.
And thank you so much. That was incredibly gracious and extremely generous and so on brand for you. So one of my absolute favorite people to have worked with. And thank you for that. And thank you to the team at LinkedIn for having me be part of this. And I think it's I hope to make it a really valuable use of time. And I'm so thrilled that you started out by talking about me as a small business owner, because that's one of the things that I'm most proud of over the last 25 years, but also really proud of over the last 8 months, that I've had to sort of really live in the same world that all of you are living in, thinking about kind of how I'm not only going to keep my business afloat and operating at a great capacity, but also really serving customers. So I want to kind of start from that place. So I'm going to go ahead and move into my slides in just a second. I do want to just offer one bit of color. Got a note from a member of the LinkedIn community. And the question that he asked me was like, what's with the title? What does it mean bringing intention and purpose to sales and marketing? Is that just marketing speak? Is that something, what is this session really going to be about? And when I really looked at it, I looked at the main title, Evolving Your Customer Presence and Bringing Intention and Purpose. My thought was that is what it's about, right? It's really about kind of like how we orient ourselves, how we orient our teams and all of our actions to a customer whose life has really changed, right? So if we're not evolving with our customer and evolving the presence we have with them and how we, and the face we put to the world, then somebody else is going to do it, and we're going to lose valuable customer relationships. So that said, I want to sort of just give a quick bit of bounce. Anne was very generous in her introduction, so I'm not going to belabor that. But the reason why I'm here is that I have felt a lot like this guy, Mark Watney, who was Matt Damon's character in The Martian. And I think a lot of you have felt this way as well, right? Sort of operating completely from screens, living what sometimes seems a terrifying but also tediously boring day-to-day existence. But I think what really struck me about this film was actually how it ended, right? And the speech that he gave at the end. And he was speaking to, after his successful return to Earth, spoiler alert, Matt Damon's character, was speaking to a group of NASA cadets. And, he said, he gave a stirring speech, and he said, is this it? Is this how I end? Is this in my case, is this the end of my business? And maybe some of you had those feelings as well. As Anne mentioned, I went from a business that was 95% focused on in-person events, delivering live training, live events to my customers. And so I had to really consider that question briefly, right? So what he focused on, though, was something really important. Was he said, well, you consider that question for a minute, and then you get to work. You do the math. You solve one problem at a time. You solve another problem at a time. And if you solve enough problems, you get to go home. And I thought that was a great pivot from sort of the crisis that he sat in the middle of to really pivoting to a place of productivity and service. And that's something that was important to us. And I want to talk about that journey in just a second. So I want to offer those observations from what's now my 23-year-old startup company, right, which it is now, to really talking also about the perspectives that I've gotten from working with scores of customers and companies and thousands of sellers over the pandemic and for many years before then, and offer you some advice. One thing I'll say just in this transition is that in making the switch, the first thing that we did was to pivot to service, right? We really looked at our core values, which I'll talk about in a minute, and got to a place where we immediately got into problem-solving mode on behalf of our customers. So I'm going to talk later on about the concept of radical empathy and what that's meant to us. But safe to say now that we have made the turn. Many of you are making that turn now, and some of you have. But getting to that productive place where you feel like you've really built your business back to a stable place. So grateful for that opportunity and so grateful for the progress we made. And I want to share some of that with you. So there are three parts to today's workshop. Number one, what I call the new old foundations, right? So I want to sort of talk about three concepts there that are really about getting your orientation, getting your head right, having your team oriented the right way, the connection between what the marketers in your organization are doing and what the sellers are doing, making sure that we are operating from a solid base. And I'll talk about how that has helped us in our transition and how it's helping a lot of my customers. Second, we're going to take a different view from inside the box, right? So this world we live in of Microsoft Teams conferences and Zoom screens and Google Hangouts and the distance from our coworkers can feel very limiting, right? But we're going to turn that around and we're going to focus on what is now possible from inside the box. And third, I want to focus on what I call yesterday's best practices. So things that were a good idea in terms of your customer presence and how you thought about presenting yourself to the world 9 months ago are today's survival skills. So let's get to it. Number one, I'd like to talk about the concept of how this pandemic, how the new relationships with customers, the distance selling, the distance learning, the distance communication is being perceived. So what's the framing of this in our companies and within the industries that we serve overall? what I hear a lot, what I've heard a lot of over the first several months of the pandemic is a lot of people talking about going back, right? Getting back to work, getting back to conferences, going back to the office, going back to lunches in restaurants and so forth, right? So there's a natural, when things are taken away, when things are changed, there's a natural inclination to think of it being a return, right? A return to something that's of the past. But I've seen now 6 major disruptions over the course of my career, from Black Monday in the late 80s to Desert Storm, to the dot-com bubble collapsing, to the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis, the election of 2016, and on and on. And every time that there is a major disruption, every time that there is a major sort of shuffling of the world, we always end up with a very different world ahead. So one of the things that has been very healthy in my relationships with customers, and also that what I see so many great sales and marketing leaders doing, is changing the orientation from getting back, making it a return to anything, to really focusing on the future, focusing on the era that's ahead. Because every time that the deck is shuffled in the way that it has been over the years, we've always ended up with a different set of tools, a different business environment, different ways that customers want to be connected with. So we have to orient ourselves not as surviving a siege, not as sort of getting through a hard time, but really as moving into a new era. So framing this as a quest, framing it as an opportunity for reinvention, preparing yourself and your team and your customer relationships for how you're going to serve them ahead. And as it's been said many times, it only takes 21 days to develop a habit. And right now, the entire world has been on a crash course of distance learning, Zoom communication, sharing ideas on Microsoft Teams with your coworkers, managing sort of disparate and distant teams. So that's not going to change overnight. We're not going to come out of the biggest simultaneous change in human history and end up operating in a slightly different version of the past. So don't frame it as a return, frame it as a quest for what's next. The second thing, and this is something very near and dear to my heart, is the relationship with values, right? So in my estimation, something I've always believed, values are not a luxury in business. They are actually the Swiss Army knife of decision making. So the connection there for me and for my organization was that as we sort of hit bottom on March 9th and had to literally sort of reinvent our business overnight, the first thing we did was connect to our values and consult our values, right? And our values profile happens to be these 7 words: optimism, grit, respect, ownership, service, courage, and connectedness. And literally everybody in my organization has a copy of those words in their workspace. And it allowed us to immediately, when we were faced with a world of change, we consulted the values. Right? We looked at the combination of grit and service and optimism, and that's what gave us permission to immediately start to experiment with our product and stand up things and have an imperfect set of tools that we could train our customers on. Right? We realized that the sense of service said that a lot of them are going through the same thing we were. And it was important for us to step into that void and help them navigate this world, help them sell remotely, help them to operate and stay connected to their teams via Zoom, via Microsoft Teams, and other platforms. So that really allowed us to survive the earliest stage. It allowed us to sort of pivot immediately forward into a place of productivity. I'm a big fan of the Spencer Tracy quote from a movie in the 1950s, where he said, "It's impossible to feel sad and useful at the same time." So that sentiment allowed us to really connect to the sense of service, right? 23 years in the industry, so many of our customers have done so much for us over the years. We immediately looked to serve them and give them what they needed. So that connection to values was important for my small company, but it's also something that is critical even at the largest company level. I wanted to sort of just share this from a piece that was in Apple News just the other day, and it's an Inc. magazine story about Delta. Delta and it lives in the same world that United and American and the other airlines do, and clearly this is a horrible, horrible time to be an air carrier. But Delta has gotten through with the highest customer marks, the highest employee satisfaction, the greatest sense of engagement, and they have not had a forced layoff of even a single employee up till now. So how do they do that? Well, I think the answer is here. They're a company that is extremely values driven, right? They stay in touch with those values. They use them. They make decisions with them. So the idea that there's not a lot you can control right now, even less you can predict, but you still get to decide on your values as a company and as an individual. So the decisions you make reveal your character, and the way your team responds reveals whether the culture you've built can withstand the pressures of a world that sometimes seems like it's falling apart around you. So big company application, small company application, and I wanted to lay those handful of values out for all of you to consider, because they become the Swiss Army knife of how you make fantastic decisions. The last thing I'll say in this new old foundation section before I bring Ann back and we share a couple of questions is this concept, and I wrote about this in my blog recently. This idea that we need to stop thinking about the divisions between seller and buyer, between vendor and customer, between boss and employee, right? We're all in the same ecosystem now, and we all have to think about the health of the ecosystem. So as you think about the overall relationship in which you operate with your customers, with your employees, with your vendors, is to stop thinking about kind of the role definitions, but start thinking about the fact that we're all living in the same ecosystem. So in the ecosystem, in a healthy ecosystem in business, empathy is oxygen. So nothing lives, nothing thrives, nothing is powered in a world without empathy. So I'll talk more about the concept of radical empathy later on in the presentation, but we as business owners, as marketers, as sellers have to constantly be pumping empathy into the ecosystem. We have to constantly be forcing ourselves and those we work with to look through the customer's eyes, to look through the eyes of the coworker. That is how we make the very best decisions. That's how we slow the process down and really preserve the health of the ecosystem. Once the ecosystem is stable and healthy and thriving on the oxygen of empathy, that's when we start to relentlessly connect and empower everyone in the ecosystem. Give people choices, connect them to one another, connect them to the mission, connect them to your values, be vulnerable, be public, be transparent about the values that your organization brings in your sales messaging, in your marketing messages, and in your internal communication. Look to empower everyone, right? Let the customer choose their own journey. Let them feel like they have a seat at the table with you. Now, this is what builds a healthy ecosystem, and it's the basis on which all the stuff we're going to talk about now really thrives. So I'm going to bring Ann into the picture here, and I've got I believe the slide is still up. I can't see it just now on my screen, but I have quickly sort of 4 pieces of advice for people on this, and then I want to go to your questions and the questions from the audience. There it is. First piece of advice is that in marketing, sales, and internal dialogue, it's important for us to lean into a narrative about a better shared future, right? So start to visualize that point in the horizon where your company, where the customer relationship is going, and that's point 1. Number 2, when you're feeling limited by circumstances, shift the focus to reinvention, right? Ask the question, how might we be great at this? Whether this is Zoom, whether this is sort of writing better marketing messages, sending better messaging out to the marketplace, based on the limited palette that we can work with today. Be public and vulnerable about those values, especially with your own colleagues, but also with your customers. And have an application discussion today with your team about values. And then number 4, start challenging the dividing lines that exist in the world, right? Remember empathy. One of my favorite concepts is the idea of getting to us in the customer relationship, right? If we can get that customer on the same side of the desk with us, great things are going to happen. So Ann, I know you may have a couple of questions. There might be 1 or 2 from the audience. So let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, I don't see questions yet from the audience, although I would love to. So feel free to reach out if you have any. I was thinking of a question as you talked about this, and it's a simple one, really, which is all this talk about ecosystem. And yet in sales, a lot of times I think we approach it from a point of view of winning. So connect the dots.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's fantastic, and the very poignant question. So much of the language of sales and the philosophy of sales and what has been taught to people over the years, a lot of it's based on conflict theory, right? It's a lot of the Sun Tzu art of war and sort of sales as a game, sales as a contest to be won. Well, we've lived for the last 20 years, you and I, in a world that's been digitally dominated, where the customer has access to so much information. They live in a world of transparency, so they can, if it feels artificial, if it feels like a conflict, they can easily keep us at an arm's distance and keep us away from the process until they actually need something from us. So the idea of going into it as a conflict or a game or a contest, to me, is antithetical. So I have really, way before the pandemic set in, I have always sort of believed and preached and taught the idea of like really getting close to the customer, operating on the basis of needs, leading with needs, and sort of solving for the customer rather than selling to the customer. And to me, it's the only way to go in this kind of an environment where the power balance between control of information is no longer there.
Yeah, it's a lot like how we used to think about social media and realize that the voice of the customer is so very much there that it has to be a dialogue. It can't really be a one-way conversation. Okay, I have another question from the audience. Wait, I've just scrolled. At what point do you change your company's core principles versus trying to bend your past organizational principles? When do you go back to the drawing board and start from scratch?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. So I think that the values that you operate on, I think that like there's going to be a consistent through line in that they'll all be attached to a place of sincerity. They'll be attached to a place that the group identifies with. But I think that revisiting those values on an ongoing basis is hugely important. So I really think of it as not something that's fixed and that sits on the wall, but something that you get down off the wall and you use every day. You apply, you share the values, you talk about how they've been used and referenced, during the course of business decision making. But I think at the same time, I think it's always healthy for any manager, any leader to open up those values and say to their team, as I have done, okay, let's look at these, right? What still fits? Where do we go from here? How do we make this more inclusive? How do we bring in the values and the focus of new employees who might be joining us? So yeah, it's healthy to revisit them on an ongoing basis.
It's funny, my team Venture, which is within LinkedIn Marketing Solutions, we established our values because we're a relatively new team. And then even just 9 months later, we took a look at them again and we thought about how we need to evolve them right now. So I couldn't agree with you more on that. So one of the questions we have here is, what's the best way to get a client to open up about issues they face so that we can demonstrate empathy?
Yes. Oh, fantastic. I'm actually going to put a pin in that one because that's what the end of section 2 and all of section 3 is really about. So thank you for that question, listener. But we're gonna go there, and I just want to answer that in context of what's to come. So let's do that, okay?
So let's move forward.
Awesome. So let me actually get go ahead and get the slide up, please. Fantastic. So the rest of our time together is going to be spent really on two things. Number one is sort of like really, confronting the perceived limitations of the world we're operating in now, and then also and turning that around, and then also thinking and talking about kind of, okay, how do we create that empathetic moment? How do we preserve and build on that quality connection, right? So everything is somewhat smaller now. Right, the office space that we operate in is a lot smaller for most of us. The windows that we operate in are quite small. The perceived attention span of our customers at a time when they're getting 60% more email than they were pre-pandemic is certainly smaller. So everything can feel very, very small. The only thing that's not smaller is the opportunity to connect. Right, so the opportunity for intimacy is there. We can leverage these tools. We can leverage this moment to create new intimacy with our customers. The other day I was interviewed by a customer at their sales conference, and as we did the interview over Zoom, and the question that he asked me was, so how do we get back the human connection, right? So will we ever sort of get back that kind of human connection that we used to have? And I sort of turned it around on him and said, Michael, I get what you're saying, but it's a false question. Because how is this not a human connection? How is this not a connection between two people who are having a moment, who are able to see each other, who are able to collaborate, connect? So it's it's a different way to look at it. Place is now irrelevant. Timelines have collapsed, right? The opportunity to use these tools to do things that couldn't be done before is key, right? A lot of us miss conferences. We miss the ability to go to a trade show or an industry conference and find that serendipity of connection with customers and have an opportunity to make new connections, right? Well, because of Microsoft Teams, because of Zoom, because people are operating from fixed places and sort of are in the same place every day and not traveling, who's to say that you can't host a conference next week? Who's to say you can't bring together a small influential group of your customers and get them to share with each other? Who's to say you can't use these tools for new kinds of tutorials and demonstrations and connections? So it doesn't just happen though, right? So we're going to talk about a couple of concepts of how you optimize for this world, how you use Microsoft Teams and Zoom and other platforms to get to a much better place. So the first thing is, again, the orientation is not about the past and getting back to it. If you look at this as sort of a transitional set of technologies that are going to get us through a certain period of time so that we can go back to what we were doing before, you're automatically limiting the thinking. You're automatically limiting the possibility for yourself. So my advice to my clients is don't settle for screen sharing, right? This has now become a permanent part of the landscape. This has become a way that we will sell and connect with customers and serve customers and commune with one another for decades to come. So the idea of thinking about the precedent to this. So 140 years ago, someone was the first person to use the telephone to set up a sales appointment. Then 40 years later, someone was the first one to actually run a sales call by phone. So it really wasn't considered something that would be done prior to those times. So the opportunity is, don't look at this as a replacement channel for past behaviors. Accept it on its own merits. Look at the strengths of the medium. Look at the strengths of the channel, what the possibilities that it creates, but also bring a new attitude to it. As I worked with sales teams and marketing departments over the pandemic, the first thing that I encountered was that a lot of people were seeing Zoom or Teams or one of the other platforms as the replacement mechanism for the PowerPoint presentation that they would have otherwise done in a conference room or across a desk. Wrong way to look at it, right? The appetite, the ability to tell long linear stories through this channel, very different. Many of you who have tried to sort of connect with your teams and your customers in these platforms, right? You realize how unforgiving it is for monologue. So it's bringing a different set of intentionality and different behaviors and a different attitude to the task. So I want to sum that up here, and then I'll go deep on a couple of tactical slides right after this. But whether you're connecting with team members, whether you're connecting with a single customer, whether you, in a sales situation, whether you're serving a customer in a troubleshooting or problem-solving environment, become the host, not the entertainment, right? So adopting the idea of being a host in this environment. So we can't be focused on engagement, right? The pure engagement, the way that we used to define it, was a lot of nodding heads, people giving us sort of positive signals, body language that we could read, sort of affirming us as the teller of the message. Well, that's gone now. You can still have amazing connections with customers, but you've got to do it through the mantle of being a host, being that person who is making people feel included, being intentional about it all, bringing people into the conversation. And I'll talk about some of those steps and tips in just a minute. But I think what's most important here, again, going back to that early concept, it's a new sense of empathy, right? We have to think about the person on the other side of it. We've all been on many of these kinds of calls and meetings over the last several months, right? We need to bring that into our own presence, in screen share. So really quickly, I just want to tick off, a couple of things a piece of advice that I give to sales, to sellers, to marketers that I work with. Number one, whatever your platform, whether it's Teams, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Google Meet or something else, right? Really important to understand who's there, right? So, and that sounds simple, but if you work with a large group, often you have people who join the meeting, you're not quite sure who they are. You have different names on the screen than the ones you might have been expecting, et cetera. So I think it's important to kind of understand who's there, have that sort of roll call, that sheet of names in front of you, so you understand who's really part of this engagement. Invite people on camera. Number one complaint that I get from sellers and from managers is that, like they're talking to a lot of black squares on a screen, right? They're not really seeing who's out there, and it feels one-sided. Well, I think a lot of times we never go to the step of actually inviting people on camera from a place of generosity and inclusion, right? Letting them know why you want them on camera, what the experience is going to be like, et cetera. Second, are they on the app, right? Is the sign-in process stripped down? So really thinking about their experience all down the line. These things seem simple. These are the hygiene of it. These are the things that can otherwise create a lot of disarray and challenges in a screen sharing environment. So getting the waiting room protocols right, making sure that the passwords are in place. For groups, you've got that cheat sheet of not only names but locations. What time zone are people in your group meeting? What's in your window? So what I like to say is that your Zoom screen, your team screen is your new bathroom mirror. You'd never go to work without sort of checking your appearance. You'd never go to work without sort of looking in that full-length mirror. This is your new full-length mirror. So what's the lighting like? The angles and the clarity. Are you able to sort of make eye contact with people? Can they see your face? Can they understand your expression? Right? It takes work, right? It takes habit and it takes discipline, but it's worth doing because this is our face to the world now. Taking care of sound optimization, right? You notice that I have on a wired headset right now. That makes a huge difference in terms of the quality of the voice that comes through to people. Being a Jedi with that mute button, making sure that background noise gets canceled if you're running the meeting. And also asking yourself, can I use a co-pilot on this call? If you're working with a large group of customers, it's always important to have somebody in the background kind of, checking things, looking at the chat stream, keeping time for you and doing 100 other things. It's also important not just to think about the technology and the process stuff, but also to think about the actual flow itself. What is the natural flow of a high quality screen engagement with a customer, with a team member? And I think here it's like we want to share the purpose and the form of the meeting early, right? As Anne started this meeting by kind of telling people what to expect, how it was going to be broken up, what the flow was going to be like, what it was about, how we were going to sort of break for questions at different places. We need to do that in every meeting. Customers become extremely anxious when they don't know where they are in the process and they don't know what's still to come. So tell them what you're going to do in the meeting. Tell them that there's going to be limited slideware. Set the expectations on length, on slide count, on flow and interaction. Share the housekeeping details that you need to, but most importantly, get people talking early. To the listener question about creating that sense of empathy and connection early, this is the point that I'm going to hit hard in our next segment, right? Talking about kind of how do we sort of invite people into the conversation, extremely early and create a dynamic where they're talking about the stuff that they know a lot about early. So that first exchange, the first couple of minutes that we're together, so critical. The strategic use of chat, right? In a Zoom or Teams environment, right? The ability to use chat as your connective tissue, especially with a large group, but with any customer. When I'm on a sales call with a client, I take my notes in chat so that they can see exactly how I'm processing what they're telling me, right? It's a sign of respect. They feel engaged, right? They're able to sort of play back a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. And plus, as a salesperson, I get to sort of take that chat transcript and drop it right into my CRM. Another point is don't lead with your story, lead them to your story, right? The moments of self-introduction, the credentials presentation that a lot of us do at the outset of marketing messaging, at the outset of customer engagements, right, can be a deadly quagmire for empathy. So instead, it's like get right to their story and then lead them into the story about how you can help them. And then finally, one of the things that salespeople and others tend to do in these kinds of environments is to assure everyone that you want to keep it interactive. So please interrupt me if you have a question. Well, we can't count on that. People never take that bait. Instead, we have to interrupt ourselves. So constantly inviting them to connect, in chat with us, constantly asking them questions, inviting them into the conversation. And then, of course, like knowing what we want out of the engagement and ending with a clear ask. So really quickly, I'll tick off the four, and then we'll bring Ann back here, right? So number one, commit fully to screen sharing as a permanent pillar of your marketing and sales approach. Assume that you're going to be doing this for the next 20 or 30 years. So bring that intention, inclusion, excellence to this platform, right? And then start living those choices. Number two, reinvent the sales and marketing process as if each outreach would result in this kind of intimate, collaborative, virtual conversation with a key customer. How might each of the steps that you take and the decision change as a result of that, knowing that it was going to lead to this kind of an intimate connection? Third, self-audit the images that are projected on your Zoom, your WebEx, your Teams, your Google Meet screens, the lighting, the sound, the eye contact. There's a practical answer to every element. So remember, your computer screen is your new mirror. And then finally, for your next customer contact, consider the reasons why they'd share in chat, why they would choose to be on screen and on mic. Are you giving them a good reason to connect with you, right? So those great online moments don't just happen. They're hosted and they're curated and they're earned. So I'm going to invite Ann back to see if she has questions or if she has any from you guys.
One of the questions that I've been thinking about, and I've seen something very similar in the chat, relates to your last point, which is that, really, sometimes you just get so exhausted, you feel like you're talking to yourself on a live screen and, or a webinar like this one, and you just can't feel the people in the room, and you really want to encourage people to use video and engage. And yet it's kind of awkward because you don't want to be critical of them and be like, how come you're not, putting your camera on? So what are the tricks that you've been learning to do that more successfully?
Yeah, it's interesting. I ran a workshop this morning about half an hour before we got together on this call. I was running a workshop for 40 people. And immediately I saw that only about 32 of them, I think, were live, and the rest were in black screens. And first thing I did was I gave them permission. I said, listen, if you have a reason to be off camera, I understand if you've got a child in the home and you just don't feel comfortable being on camera right now, or for some other reason, maybe a bandwidth concern, then I understand, right? I gave them permission to be off camera, but then I told them why they should be on camera. I said, we're gonna have a very interactive discussion here. I'm going to be asking a lot of direct questions and bringing people into the conversation because what you have to say has value to me. So knowing that I'm going to do that, if you are able to turn on your cameras, please do. And immediately, 6 of the 8 cameras went back on, right? People joined in. But again, it's like sometimes they have to be asked, but ask in a very generous way, ask in a very kind of understanding, service-driven way. And you'll find that like people will rise to it, right? But I think frankly, if they haven't seen a benefit from being on camera in a number of their meetings, they have to understand that this one's going to be different.
Yeah. So what's in it for me, and also just to your point earlier, the point of empathy. One thing that I hear a lot, and I feel it, so I know why I'm hearing it so much in sales, is the idea that in this virtual world, it's okay. It works okay when we already have a relationship to interact in a virtual fashion. But when we don't have a relationship, when we're trying to build a new relationship, it feels a lot more difficult to people to create a meaningful connection. I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, I'm going to be just a little bit cagey on that one because that's actually another thing that leans into the next segment. But I'll give you sort of the overarching principle, which is if you want attention, if you want trust, if you want engagement, if you want intimacy, if you want the customer's business, right? You can't control that you get any of those things, but you can always control whether you deserve them. So focus on kind of, again, getting to that place of empathy and focusing on like, what have I done to deserve that customer's trust and engagement? Have I actively invited them into the process? Have I prepared in a way that demonstrates that I'm operating from empathy already, that I've researched their business, that I have identified a problem that I can help them solve for? So that's the lead in. And actually the final section of the talk is going to be really about the things that we do to deserve that. And then to be able to sort of get that in this environment. I think, and you and I know each other for a long time, and we both realize that a lot of salespeople crave like, oh, I used to be so close to customers. There was so much magic that happened in those meetings and in those conference rooms, and I could read their body language and so forth. Frankly, a lot of those were captive audiences as well, right? Because they were there, because they were present. People were polite, people were supportive, but I think that we were able to get away with a lot for a number of years. Well, now this Zoom world that we're in and this Teams world that we're in is an unforgiving environment, right?
Yeah.
You have to earn every minute of the attention you get. You have to earn the questions. You have to earn the engagement. It can be done, and it's what I have worked to do and taught other people and teams to do over this pandemic. But it's not something that just happens.
Yeah, well, I'm going to let you get to that, but I have one more question from our viewers, and that is, and it's a really good one too. Can you expand a bit on how you would lead a customer to your story instead of leading with your story?
Fantastic. Yes, we're actually, you know what, Ann? Let's go right there because that's the next section.
Sign of a good presentation is that we ask for your next slide.
Yeah, we didn't even rehearse that part either. So. Awesome. Well, let me jump into that, and then we'll touch base again right at the end of the section, which is coming up in about 15 minutes. So let me jump into the slide. All right. So a couple of overarching thoughts here, and then we'll get into some of the specifics. So building on the listener question from earlier and what Ann just said, it's like, how do we get to that place, right? How do we orient ourselves and create that opportunity to lead the customer to our story rather than have to present our credentials, to go through sort of the typical things that sellers and marketers do when they're in sales mode. So the first step is this concept of radical empathy, right? And the way I've always referred to it is getting on the same side of the desk with the customer. Not to sort of orient ourselves around like, how can I get this customer to buy, which is an outcome, right, that I ultimately don't control, but rather focus on like, how can I create genuine value for this customer, right? Which is something that I absolutely control. We don't control the outputs, we control the inputs. So we're going to talk, so the first input you have is the orientation that you bring to the relationship, right? If we're practicing radical empathy, then, we never inside our companies talk about the customer as them, right? We never, we never ostracize the customer. We never sort of alienate them or even in internal dialogues, right? We talk about serving them. We talk about building for them. We talk about solving for them. So this is a hugely important concept. And it's something that if you really start to examine the language inside your own organization, as you start to read the marketing copy that goes out, as you start to read sort of the text in your presentations and so forth, it forces you to look at it through the customer's eyes. You start to ask, so what? So what is the so what here? So what does this mean for me? When do we get to my part? So the order of things frequently is all about the vendor until much later in the engagement and much later in the copy. And then it's about the customer. So customer first is not just a slogan. It's not just a sign of esteem for the customer. It's actually a navigational strategy. So we empathize with the customer by getting to the things that are important to them quickly, right? So I'm going to talk about this on a couple of different levels. One is talking about it from the standpoint of the actual outreach that we make to a potential customer via email, via messaging we put out on LinkedIn and other platforms. So it's sort of like, how are we writing to people in this day and age when reading time is so scarce? So getting to that point very, very quickly is hugely important. Let me show you, let me show you just an example of that. So, so when I started to work with teams on communicating with their customers in this environment, right? I presented them with two facts. And fact number one was that, your customer today is getting 60% more email than he or she was getting before the pandemic. People have more time on their hands. They spend, they're able to spend more time sending stuff. Those salespeople who are off the street and not on airplanes, have more time to email and automate email. So we flooded people's inboxes, right? So that's fact number one, that like it's a very narrow window of opportunity. Fact number two is that you may be writing your email on your laptop or on your desktop machine, but the customer's reading that email on their phone. So as we think about that as a concept, right? So think about the client scanning and triaging emails on their mobile device before they ever get to the message that you labored over, right? So how important then are subject lines, opening lines, right? This real estate, this tiny bit of real estate here is so critical, right? So couple of tips that I use. Number one is that like I'm gonna put some actual power words in my subject line. I'm going to make sure that I'm really speaking to that customer need in the subject line. But by the way, I'm not going to write that subject line. I'm not going to write that headline until after I've written the email, right? Because that's and flipping the order of those things forces you to really think about how are you communicating what this email is going to be about. Second, I use a tip. I use a little trick of starting my emails with "I'm writing you because." That forces me to get right down to business, to speak to what's in it for the customer right in the very first two lines of the email. So I take advantage of that real estate. In this case, I'm acknowledging that this is a customer whose business was disrupted by the cancellation of spring sports, and that he is he's in a position of now having to try to sort of hold on to his budgets, right? And I communicated that right there. So as I'm going through this process, I'm buying my interest one line, 2 seconds at a time. If I'm lucky enough to have the customer, and I may have to write them 3, 4, 5 times, right? So it's important to keep the messages short. You can send them a sequence of a number of messages that are short, that fit on one screen of his or her phone. The entire message fits on that mobile screen. Also, I'm going to go to great pains to tell him sort of what this is going to be about, right? This is not just a sales pitch. This is not my road capabilities follow-up that I'm going to be showing him. This is not going to be just a normal hard sell, but rather, I've thought about your problems. I'd like to bring you in on the conversation now. I'm offering the promise of collaboration, not just presentation. Next, I'm also going to go even deeper than that in describing the experience, right? Hey, I'd like to have a structured, collaborative screen share meeting with you, only 5 slides, all about your business, right? Really sort of selling the meeting that I'm going to want to have with this customer and that she's going to want to have with me. And then finally, it's always important for us as salespeople and as marketers to own the next step, right? Not to leave it up to the customer to schedule with us or organize the timing and so forth. So own the next steps, say what you're going to do next, set that pattern of commitment, right? You set the pattern of service based on how you follow up with the customer. So just, you should think about empathy, right? This is empathy demonstrated in the inbox, right? I'm getting to what's important for the customer early in the message, leading with needs, making it about them first, and then leading them into my story. The next point I wanted to make is that a lot of us like to refer to ourselves and our companies as solution providers and solution companies, right? Well, you're not a solution-oriented company just because you call your products solutions. You have to actually solve things. So one of the sort of bumper sticker ideas that has powered my career and I like to think my success over the years is like, don't tell me what you sell, show me what you solve. So the idea of problem first, of not selling the drill bit, selling the hole that it drills, right? Understanding kind of what is that core business problem that the customer may be grappling with, right? And obviously everybody is still in a very altered reality, right? But everybody's facing challenges. It's not that hard for us to develop a point of view on customer challenges so that we can start the communication there. So this is the point, by the way, to the listener who asked the question, and for you, Anne, this is the point where we really talk about kind of how does that sales structure, how does that call structure change as we approach as we approach it from a place of empathy, right? So it goes like this. So the four steps that I recommend every seller, every organization go through as they're thinking about approaching a customer, right? And also the 4 steps that I suggest they go through in terms of the structure of the actual customer engagement, right? Are these. Number 1, the checkup. So a lot of salespeople, a lot of marketers think that they want to go into customer engagements and ask a lot of really good questions. I say ask those questions first, right? Learn before you go in. So the checkup is really about kind of what educated assumptions can I make about the customer's business, about their industry, about their situation. If you're a business or a seller who calls on hundreds of customers and prospects, then make some assumptions based on what that industry looks like, right? So tell them, companies your size are struggling with this. Businesses in your sector have been challenged by this, right? So it's not that hard to take this information, roll it up into one interesting slide that's all about them. Show them that slide first, right? Ask them the question at the outset of the sales engagement. Hey, tell me what I got right here. Tell me what you're interested in, and most importantly, tell me what I missed. Tell me what I should know about your company that's not here on this page. So this is a generous act. You're not just doing your homework; you're handing it in. Second step in the process that we want to prepare for is a diagnosis. If we've done the checkup, we should also have an idea about the specific circumstance or challenge that the customer is facing, right? We need to take a shot. If we're operating from a place of being a strategic organization, a strategic resource, then we should have a point of view on problems that the customer may be challenged by. So this hypothesis also goes on a slide, right? So I can pivot in the conversation, say, hey, thanks for that input on the company information we gathered. Tell us what you think about this business problem. Is this something that fits for you? Is this something we can help you with? If not, what else can we help you with? So that allows us the latitude to then move into the prescription phase, to then talk about our company, the things that we offer, right? The solutions that we bring. The problem is that a lot of sellers and a lot of organizations go in their prescription first. We talk all about our products. We talk all about our capabilities, but prescription without diagnosis or even a checkup is malpractice. So instead, it's like we're leading them to our prescription. We're leading them to our company, to our capabilities, to our credentials, instead of leading with them. And by the way, to those of you who are worried that this is going to take up a lot of time and eliminate valuable sort of sales and information time, this part of the process can take, a small handful of minutes, 10 minutes total at the beginning of a sales encounter. But it's time well spent, because then the customer has a reason to care about the prescription. And then finally, what I always recommend to sellers is think about your sales call like a trip on the highway, right? On the on-ramp, it's important to speed up, right? You want to get into the flow of traffic. So get past all the artificial stuff, all that slow, friendly stuff. Get into what really matters. Get that slide in front of the customer quickly. Get them talking. On the way out, you want to slow down, because this is the part of the sales engagement where you really get to know the customer even better, where they tell you about the politics, the process. They tell you about the decision, how decisions get made, where they talk about budgets, where they talk about support. So let me jump ahead. Got a couple more slides here before we go. This is an important one, right? I will tell you that based on the work that I was doing with so many sales organizations through the first half of the pandemic, there was a real hesitancy to be too commercial, to talk too much about solving, to talk too much about kind of what was going to happen and how would the commitment look and so forth, right? So you had a lot of thoughts and prayers, hope your family's well, none of which is bad by any stretch, right? But the challenge there was that people were holding back, right? I'll be here when you need me. I'll be thinking about you. Just reach out whenever I can be of help, that kind of thing. It's really important in tough times to always be that person who brings a dish. So what I encourage organizations to do is to sort of think about that customer empathetically, right? Think about genuinely serving them, right? Think about generously serving them, and go. Don't create an artificial break in your sales process so that you're causing yourself to. I'm just going to do the first call. The first call is what's going to be about getting to know them and understanding them, and then I'll come back and I'll do something for them on a subsequent call. No, prepare for it. Go in with sort of a half-baked dish, right? Let them know that you've created something for them. Let them sort of work with it a little bit, react to it, and so forth. So go forward to the point of solution. Be prepared. You may not get the opportunity on every sales call, but be prepared to solve with the customer in every engagement, because it may be the only one that we get. So with that said, quickly tick off the survival skills, and then I'll bring Ann back. Number one, right? The customer can never again be them or they, right? So radical empathy is about, allowing everything, our plans, our process, our preparation, to revolve around deserving and earning that investment. You got to live this. Second, start those marketing and sales emails with, I'm writing you or we're writing you because, right? That forces you to really sort of front load, to operate above the fold. Third, start planning and inviting your customers to 20-minute meetings. It speaks directly to your economy and good use of their time, but it also makes your own calendar more productive. Show the customer you know them early in every marketing or sales exchange. And finally, don't have any more first meetings. Do your checkup in advance. Come with a hypothetical diagnosis that you can help and collaboratively work with them on. And then share your prescription. This is your preparation minimum if you want to create empathetic sales environments. So I'm going to stop there. Ann, you want to come back in, and we may have time for a couple questions still.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm loving this. It's funny, early on in my sales career, I sat down and I did this presentation with my boss. And I did this great job on the presentation. And at the end, he said, if you did not think about your clients as puppies, if you did not say their name on every slide, then you haven't captured their attention. It's like, so what, So this is important for you because in every single slide, and you made me think about that again. It's been a while. So one thing that I think would be helpful is that some of the folks listening to this call are sales professionals, but some of us are also marketers. And I wonder if you could stop for a moment and think about how you want those marketers to be thinking of these recommendations.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Ann. I think that's a really important point. I think that as marketers, right, we get a lot of pressure, right? We get pressure from executive leadership. We get pressure from our product people. We get pressure from sales to constantly tell our own story, right? So sort of like make sure that you get every feature in front of the customer, whether the support you're offering as a marketer is that marketing message that's going out to the public, right? That's going out to your customers via LinkedIn, via email marketing, via some other channel, or even in the decks that we create and sort of the sales materials that we create. So this idea, I think one of the central themes that's important for marketers here is this concept of like really becoming an advocate for the customer, right? Really looking at it through their eyes, challenging the us first orientation of a lot of marketing materials, a lot of messaging. And then also going back to that sort of email example I showed, the really being being focused on kind of like, hey, how do we get to the point sooner, right? We're really sort of operating like we get attention for a couple of seconds, maybe one line, one look, and then people are gone. So getting to the point early is another key part for marketers, I think.
And then the last question I see that might be good for you to address broadly, given all you've told us, is beyond partnership between marketing and sales teams, what's your advice on a sort of a 1 + 1 = 3 strategy where where the company explores partnerships with other companies and gets them to kind of band together to drive more sales together in partnership? How would you weigh the risk and the reward of that kind of work?
That's interesting. So yeah, what I'm hearing in that is sort of a consortium, concept. The idea that like we're gonna co-market together. We're gonna sort of offer value to the customer together.
Yeah, like what I'm hearing is, woo, that sounds amazing and could be really hard.
Yeah. Well, I think two thoughts on that, and it's a great question. Whoever offered that. I think what's really important is, first of all, to understand that we're already doing that to some degree, right? We're creating that collaboration within the departments of our company. So we're every good seller, every good marketer is like the producer of a movie, right? And you're producing several movies, and you're bringing in people. So sometimes you're going forward with a good collaboration between you and your own sales team and your product team, right? So those are the characters and the director and the sound people and the screenwriters, in the story that you're putting together. So we're always doing you're always leading a team. You're always leading a mission forward. There are no individual contributors anymore, right? There are no every company is only as good as how it mobilizes its people and its vendors. So you're already doing that. So I think that the last piece of advice that I would give is understand that you've already got those skills, but then also make sure that you're oriented around the why. I know there's probably a lot of people on the webinar who are fans of Simon Sinek, right?
Yeah.
He says, start with why.
Yeah.
Right? Start with why. So why are we doing this? Why is this good for our common customer, right? And ultimately, if we operate from that place of why and we operate from a place of values, we'll make good decisions, right? And and that's what every great leader does. And in this coalition you're building, you're the leader. And in the relationship with your talent, you're leader. And in your relationship with your erstwhile competitors or other companies you might bring into your coalition, you're the leader.
Well, that's a perfect answer to end with. And that is what we have to do. So let me just say, Doug, brilliant and inspiring as always. Everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for joining us. If you missed anything in our session or previous sessions, you can check out evolvebylinkedin.splashthat.com to watch the replay. And if you're watching in Slido, you'll see a survey populate on the right. And if you haven't already, take a minute to fill it out. We'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much, everyone, for your time and attention. Have a fantastic rest of the week.